The morning the access batch stopped opening my office door, I stood in the hallway while my assistant watched. Security said my name had been removed overnight. No one could tell me who authorized it. I went home instead of waiting for an explanation. The house was quiet, the way it always was during the week. I showered, changed, and checked my phone. There was a message from Evan sent hours earlier, short and practical, asking if I could leave the spare car keys on the console because he needed to move the car for street cleaning. I did that before leaving for the office. I hadn't thought twice. I met Evan 3 months earlier because my boiler failed during a cold snap. The building manager sent him. He was younger than I expected, efficient, calm, and he didn't talk much. He fixed the problem in under an hour, explained what he'd done, and pointed out 2 things that would need attention later without pushing. When he left, he texted his invoice and a photo of the repaired valve, labeled and dated. It felt unusually precise. The next time he came, he brought a replacement part he'd ordered on his own time because he'd been thinking about the system. That was how it started. Not flirtation. Attention. He remembered details. He noticed how I organized things. He asked permission before touching anything, even tools. When he talked, it was about function and timing, not himself. We didn't go out at first. He started stopping by after work to check small things I hadn't asked him to. He'd tighten a handle, adjust a sensor, leave notes taped neatly where I'd find them later. I began to expect him. I gave him a drawer in the kitchen for his gloves because he kept setting them down carefully on the counter. That seemed reasonable. He didn't ask questions about my work. He listened when I mentioned it. When I said I was tired of carrying everything alone, he didn't contradict me or offer advice. He showed up earlier the next morning with coffee and a quiet plan to reorganize the storage room so I wouldn't trip over boxes anymore. We worked side by side without music. Felt like relief. The first night he stayed over, it wasn't a decision. It was late. He fell asleep on the couch while waiting for a part to cool. I brought him a blanket. Later, he moved to the bedroom because the couch was too short. In the morning, he'd already made a list of repairs for the building and left it on the table, neatly folded. No note, just the list. Over the next weeks, he became a constant presence without ever announcing it. He learned my routines. He knew when I liked quiet and when I needed help. He took over small logistical things I didn't want to think about: returns, scheduling, coordinating with vendors. He did it cleanly without mistakes. When he asked for access codes to make things faster, it sounded logical. When he suggested linking calendars so he wouldn't interrupt meetings, it felt considerate. There were moments that didn't line up, but they passed quickly. Call he took outside. A delay he didn't explain. Once I found a document on my printer that I didn't remember printing. He said it must have queued earlier. That sounded possible. I didn't revisit it. By the time the building felt different without him there, I realized I had started to move through my days assuming he'd handle certain things. I didn't feel dependent. That afternoon, after security told me my access was gone, I called Evan. It rang once, then went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I drove back to the building later to clear my office. The guard wouldn't let me pass the lobby. When I got home, the spare car was gone. The next few days rearranged themselves around Evan without either of us naming it. He was there in the mornings, gone during my calls, back again before dinner. Not hovering, just present when needed. I didn't invite him to stay. I didn't ask him to leave. The house adjusted. One evening, he brought over a small locking file box. He said it was fire-resistant and that he'd picked it up because he'd noticed I kept important papers in different drawers. He placed it on the dining table and didn't open it. Said it was just a suggestion. If I didn't want it, he'd take it back. I used it that same night. It felt efficient to have everything in one place. Deeds, contracts, insurance. I didn't give him the code. He didn't ask. The next morning, I found the box moved slightly, aligned with the edge of the table. That caught my attention, but not in a way that slowed me down. He never talked about the future in grand terms. No promises. No labels. When friends asked, I said he was helping me out. That was true. When my assistant mentioned how organized things had become, I agreed. That was also true. At some point, he asked if he could coordinate directly with the building manager instead of routing everything through me. It would save time, he said. He already knew the systems. I forwarded the contact without hesitation. It felt like delegating a task I shouldn't have been doing myself anyway. He started handling things I hadn't realized took up so much space. Renewals, service calls, follow-ups. I'd come home to find printed confirmations stacked neatly on my desk, clipped and labeled. He didn't wait for praise. He didn't linger. He just made sure I saw them. The night I gave him the spare keys, it wasn't symbolic. I was leaving early the next morning. Street cleaning rules had changed. He said he'd move the car so I wouldn't get a ticket. I placed the keys on the counter while answering emails. He picked them up, tested them, set them back down in the same place. Muscle memory, careful. Later that week, he suggested syncing calendars. He'd accidentally interrupted a call, he said, and didn't want to do that again. I sent the invite while standing in the kitchen. He accepted immediately. The next interruption never happened. There were gaps I didn't fill in. Days when he was quieter. Evenings when he said he had to check on another job and didn't elaborate. Once, I noticed he'd silenced my phone during a meeting without asking. It had been buzzing. He handed it back afterward, apologetic but calm. It had helped, he said. I nodded. By then, certain decisions no longer felt like decisions. They felt like maintenance. I didn't notice when my name stopped being the default on things. Only that problems seemed to resolve themselves before reaching me. I slept better. I worked longer hours. I stopped checking behind him, until the day it didn't. By the third month, Evan no longer asked before doing things. He informed me afterward briefly, usually with a printed note left where I'd see it. The tone was the same as before. Calm, practical, nothing dramatic. One morning, he told me he'd consolidated the service vendors into a single account so invoices wouldn't scatter. He'd already spoken to them. They were fine with it. I glanced at the page while drinking coffee. The numbers looked familiar. The format made sense. I signed where he'd marked with the tab. Later that week, he suggested rerouting certain approvals through him so I wouldn't be interrupted during negotiations. He framed it as protection, not control. He'd sit in on calls if needed. Filter out noise. Only escalate what mattered. I agreed because it sounded like something I'd advise a client to do. The shift was subtle. I still made decisions. I just made fewer of them. He was careful with physical space, too. He never moved my things without returning them exactly where they'd been. If something changed, it was cleaner, quieter. The file box migrated from the dining table to the study. I didn't remember authorizing that, but it was a better place for it. He installed a small safe inside the closet wall and said it would be safer there. Fire and water protection. He left the door open so I could see it. I chose the code. He turned his back while I entered it. That night, he slept next to me and woke before I did. When I got up, the bed was made and the coffee was already cooling on the counter. The file box was gone from the study. I assumed he'd moved it into the safe. I didn't check. The midpoint came disguised as convenience. I was preparing for a week-long trip. Evan suggested granting him temporary authority to handle anything that came up while I was gone. Not full access, he said. Just enough to prevent delays. He showed me the form, already filled out except for my signature. Temporary. Time-bound. Logical. I signed it standing up, coat on, thinking about traffic. The trip went smoothly because nothing reached me. No calls. No emails marked urgent. Evan sent short updates every other day. Everything's handled. You focus on your meetings. I did. When I returned, the house felt slightly off. Not wrong. Just quieter. He wasn't there that night. He texted late, said he'd had to stay elsewhere to finish something. I slept anyway. Over the next weeks, his presence thinned. He still handled everything, but I saw less of him doing it. Notes replaced conversations. Messages replaced visits. When I asked if something was wrong, he said no. Just busy. He'd explain later. One afternoon, I tried to access a shared folder and found my permissions limited. I assumed it was a technical glitch. I flagged it for Evan. He responded hours later, said he'd look into it. He didn't. The building manager started copying Evan instead of me. Vendors addressed emails to him first. When I corrected one of them, they apologized and said they were following the updated instructions. I didn't remember issuing those. The house remained immaculate. Bills paid. Schedules intact. But the rhythm had changed. Evan was no longer adjacent to my life. He was ahead of it. The night before I planned to ask him directly what was going on, I noticed the safe door slightly ajar. Inside, everything was in order. Labeled. Indexed. Complete. Except the folder with my name on it wasn't there. I didn't call Evan about the folder. I waited until evening until it felt normal to talk. He answered on the third ring. His voice sounded the same. Steady. He said he'd explain when he got back. He didn't say when that would be. The next morning, I tried to undo one small thing. I contacted a vendor directly to adjust a delivery time. They told me they couldn't take instructions from me anymore. They weren't rude. They sounded confused. They asked if Evan was unavailable. I said I was handling it myself. There was a pause. Then they said they'd need confirmation. I didn't push. I forwarded the email to Evan with a short note. He replied hours later. Already handled. Don't worry about it. That was new. The reassurance without detail. Before, he'd show me exactly how something was resolved. Now, he closed things without explanation. I started noticing how much of my day moved around decisions I no longer made. Meetings shifted without my input. Access requests bypassed me. My assistant stopped checking with me on changes and started asking if Evan had approved them. When I corrected her, she apologized and said she was just following the updated workflow. I asked her when it had changed. She said a while ago. That night, Evan didn't come home. He sent a message saying he was staying closer to a job site. No explanation. No timeline. I didn't respond. I slept poorly. In the morning, I tried to log into an account I'd used weekly for years. The password didn't work. I reset it. The reset email never arrived. I checked spam. Nothing. I went through old confirmations and found a notice I hadn't read closely. Account administration updated. Contact Evan for details. I drove to the office building again. The same guard was there. He still wouldn't let me up. He said my badge was inactive and that any changes had to come through the listed administrator. He gave me a printed name. It was Evans. I didn't raise my voice. I thanked him and left. At home, the house felt staged. Everything in its place, but no sign of use. No tools. No jacket. The drawer in the kitchen was empty. The calendar on the fridge had been wiped clean. I opened the safe again. The contents were unchanged. Organized. Neutral. Efficient. I stood there longer than necessary, checking labels, opening folders I already knew. My name still wasn't there. I finally called Evan and didn't stop it from going to voicemail. I said his name once. I said I needed access restored. I didn't ask questions. He replied the next day with a single message. We should talk. Not in person. I'll send you what you need. What he sent wasn't an explanation. It was a short document outlining current operational authority, effective dates, and responsibilities. Everything was framed as temporary. Everything referenced decisions I didn't remember making but recognized my signature on. I tried to reply. The message bounced back. Later that afternoon, I noticed something small and physical. The spare car was still gone. Not moved. Gone. I checked the driveway camera logs. They didn't go back far enough. That evening, I sat at the dining table and realized I hadn't seen Evan inside the house for weeks. Not really. Just traces. Notes. Results. I'd mistaken proximity for control. By the time I understood that, the distance was already fixed. I stopped trying to restore everything at once. I focused on one thing per day, the way I used to handle complex problems before Evan arrived. One access. One account. One conversation. That approach failed immediately. Every attempt redirected me back to him. Banks told me to contact the authorized liaison. Vendors asked for written confirmation from the administrator. Even my own assistant hesitated before doing anything I asked, checking her screen, then looking up with an apology already formed. She said she didn't want to make a mistake. I understood that. I trained her well. What I hadn't understood was how thoroughly Evan had stepped into the space between decision and action. He hadn't erased me. He'd rerouted me. I found traces of it everywhere. Emails I hadn't opened because they looked informational. Attachments I'd signed on my phone between meetings without reading closely because the summaries sounded right. Temporary measures stacked on top of each other until they stopped being temporary. The house remained functional in the same way. Groceries appeared. Deliveries arrived on schedule. Maintenance happened without disruption. It felt like living inside a system that no longer required me. Evan didn't disappear. He stayed just present enough to prevent escalation. Every few days, a short message. Checking in. Making sure I was okay. No warmth. No cruelty. Just acknowledgement. When I asked to meet, he said it wasn't necessary. Everything was already in place. We could resolve things more efficiently in writing. He sent another document. This one outlined a transition plan. Clear language. Clean formatting. He framed it as a safeguard. To reduce stress. To give me space. He suggested I take time off while things stabilized. I noticed how often he used we, without attaching it to a shared action. I didn't sign that document. That was the first refusal. The consequences weren't immediate. They didn't need to be. The system kept working without my consent. A week later, my assistant told me HR had updated my role. Same title. Reduced scope. Temporary, she said quickly. Pending review. I asked who initiated it. She hesitated, then said Evan had handled the coordination so I wouldn't have to. That night, I opened the safe again. I checked every folder, every divider. It was all there. My life indexed. Except the pieces that would allow me to reclaim it. I remembered the first nights Evan slept beside me. How carefully he moved. How he never took up space. How he woke before me and left no trace except order. I understood then that the absence I felt wasn't new. It had been forming while he was still in the room. I tried to reach him one last time. Not to argue. Not to negotiate. To say I needed something returned. Something specific. Access. Authority. My name. He replied hours later. I've already returned what's yours. What remains is operational. There was no anger in it. No justification. Just closure. The next morning, I received a formal notice. Effective immediately. It confirmed changes already in motion. Language neutral. Tone calm. My role adjusted. My access limited. My involvement concluded. I sat at the dining table and read it twice. Then I noticed the small detail that landed harder than the rest. The document listed Evan's address as my former home. I went to the house once more, not to confront anything, but to confirm what had already happened. The lock still recognized my code. Inside, everything looked the same. Too much the same. The surfaces were clear. The air smelled neutral, like nothing had been cooked recently. I walked through each room slowly. The bedroom closet was half empty. This side was gone. Not rushed. Hangers aligned, gaps evenly spaced. The safe was still in the wall. I opened it. The contents hadn't changed since the last time. Everything that documented my past was there. Everything that allowed control wasn't. In the kitchen, the drawer where he used to keep his gloves was empty. Clean. I pulled it out anyway. Nothing underneath. I sat at the dining table and waited, though I didn't know for what. No message came. No update. The silence wasn't dramatic. It was complete. Later that afternoon, a courier rang the bell. He handed me a flat envelope and asked for a signature. My name was printed clearly. I signed without thinking. Habit. Inside was a single key and a short note. No greeting. No apology. Access for personal storage. Unit cleared by end of week. There was an address attached. a storage facility across town. I didn't recognize it. I drove there before dark. The unit was small. Inside were a few boxes. Nothing fragile. No labels in my handwriting. Office items. Books I hadn't opened in years. Framed certificates I'd taken down during a renovation and never put back up. At the bottom of one box was the folder with my name on it. It wasn't empty. It was complete. Copies of everything I'd ever needed to prove who I was and what I'd built. Organized. Indexed. Archived. It wasn't mine anymore. It was evidence. I locked the unit and left the key at the desk, telling them I wouldn't be needing continued access. They didn't ask why. When I returned to the house, the sun was already down. I noticed for the first time that the living room camera light was off. I checked the system. The account no longer listed the property. It listed Evan as primary user. I didn't try to change it. That night, I slept in the guest room. In the morning, I packed a single suitcase. Clothes for a week. Laptop. Nothing else. I left the house key on the counter. Before closing the door, I stood still for a moment, listening. There were no sounds of anyone else moving. No sense of interruption. Just a place continuing without me. I checked into a hotel nearby. Temporary. I paid for 3 nights. The clerk didn't ask questions. On the second day, I received one final message from Evan. No subject line. No explanation. The transition is complete. You won't be contacted again. I deleted it without replying. That evening, I tried to log into an account I'd used since the beginning of my career. The system recognized my email but not my credentials. The recovery options were no longer linked to me. I closed the laptop. From the window, I could see other rooms lit up in the building across the street. People moving through spaces they still belonged to. I didn't feel shocked, or angry, or surprised. I felt excluded. Not from a relationship. From my own life.